Every company will have to undergo a certain set of regulations, certain set of rules and documentation, which is very, very important. The appointment, the remuneration, the directors' value factors, everything will start coming into the Articles of Association. What is this doctrine of ultra vires is sometimes when the company is not going to follow the rules and regulation, or if there are something that has gone against the system of the company, the doctrine of ultra vires will be called in. Good morning and welcome to the session 2 of Unit 3 in Company Law, and this session is going to be about the Articles of Association. Quite an important topic. Why? Because in the previous, when we were speaking about the memorandum, the next important thing that comes in company law is the Articles of Association. This is a very, very important document that is going to bind the company in terms of its value, in terms of its operation, and in terms of its entity altogether. So moving forward, let's try to understand the Articles of Association that comes into picture. Now, a document that specifies the regulation here, because when I'm going to talk about the regulatory factor, this is also going to tell us about why this regulation comes into picture, because every company will have to undergo a certain set of regulations, certain set of rules and documentation, which is very, very important. Now here, when the regulations are being set for a company, it is more from the operational standpoint. Now what is happening in the day-to-day modern scenario is that I might be starting up a company, let's say a cement manufacturing company or a paint manufacturing or a car or a services company. But in what way am I running the company? Is it ethical enough? Am I been following the rules and regulations that has been mentioned in the articles? That is very, very important. Now, when you look into the cases of IL and FS, or when you start looking into the cases of S Bank, or when you start looking into the cases of certain companies that have been coming up regularly on the headlines, the question is that somewhere they have deviated themselves from the operations. Somewhere they have deviated from the line of action altogether. So that is why it is very, very important for all of us to understand what has been happening from the operational standpoint. Because many times what we will do is that we know what has been happening or what is going on altogether. But operationally, if we are not well built, if we have not done the exercise altogether, then yes, we are getting into trouble. So that is why it is very, very important for us to understand the Articles of Association. Now, what is going to happen here is that the Articles of Association define the company's purpose and lays out the tasks that have to be accomplished within the organization. So no doubt about it. Why? Because suppose it is going to be a fluctuation where we are going to understand how is the operation that's going to be mentioned, how is the work that is going to be mentioned. All these factors are to be designed and it has to be told by the organization till the end product is being accomplished. Because what is happening these days is that the process is even more important rather than the result itself. Now, there might be scenarios or situations where I would like to mention that there are certain deviation. I just got the result done. I just try to move away from the norms of the operation just to make my investor happy, just to make the public happy. But then ultimately when the inspection comes into picture, when they look into the articles of my association, they are very, very clear that yes, there has been an outage. Yes, there has been an area where people have gone against the system and done something which is not to be done, which is not to be mentioned at all. So that is why it is very, very important whether you are running a services oriented company or you are running a manufacturing company or a financial or a banking company altogether, you need to understand under what factors, under what system you are operating. How is your system well built enough to take into all this picture? So that is why we say that it has to be very much accomplished. That is, in terms, it has to be complete in nature as you are working, including the process of appointing directors and how the financial records to be handled. Even more crucial and an important part that we need to talk about in terms of the articles of association. Now, I might have an interest that I want to become a director in Reliance, or in Infosys, or in HDFC, or in TCS. But then, will these companies just appoint me as a director? Will these companies take me forward and suddenly start saying that I am interested in making you as a board of director or an executive director or a whole-time director? So there needs to be a process by which I have to be selected. In the sense, the person has to be selected. What are the norms? What are the qualifications? How they are being selected? For what purpose and what activity basis they are being selected? That has to be mentioned in the articles of association, including the financial records. So what are the payment, the remuneration that is being paid, how they are being taken care of. All these factors have to be mentioned very, very clearly. So the financial records of the company will also be certainly looked into in terms of the articles of association. So if there are deviations, if there are changes, if there are going to be any kind of factors that is moving away, then yes, the articles of association will definitely be looked into, will be charged upon. Now, moving forward, what are the items that are going to be covered under the articles of association? We have a whole lot of setup that we need to talk about in this, but let us go step by step to understand what are all the factors that are being covered here. Now, starting with the adoption of preliminary contracts, then the number and value of shares, allotment of shares, call on shares, transfer of share, forfeiture and reissue. Now first let us look into the first half of the entire picture here. Articles will start with the adoption of the preliminary contracts, whatever we are doing, then following with the number and value of shares. So if you're going to say tomorrow in the market that yes, my company has got so many crores of share available in the market, that is an X number of shares which are being floating in the market. What is the value of the shares? What is the value of the company in terms of the share capital? Allotment. Has all the shares been allotted to the respective shareholders on call? Has the procedure of allotting the shares done in terms of payment of the capital and every other factor? Now, what is the call on share? How many times it has been called? How many times it has been subscribed? Has the transfer of shares been properly taken? Why? Because there might be a time I have purchased the share, but I want to transfer it in somebody else's name. So is the transfer of shares also been allocated properly? The forfeiture, reissue, surrender of shares, which means to say that the documentation regarding the share transfer, share procedure and all these factors have to be clearly mentioned in the articles of association, followed by the alteration of share capital. Now that is also very, very important. Why? Because if the share capital has to be altered, has to be renamed, has to be done something accordingly, then automatically the alteration in terms of how much the money has to be allocated, what is the recall on that, how much value is going to be called for, all those alteration has to be done in the share capital is also mentioned with the articles of association. The share certificates, what kind of share certificates, how much is it, to whom it has to go, all this value, whether the certificates have been properly presented to the owner, whether it has been taken care of, all these factors will also come in terms of your share certificates. Now, conversion of shares into stocks. So whether you are going to give stock option. Now, most of you might know that when you are dealing with the market, there are two kinds of trading. One is equity, the other one is derivatives. So when you're going to talk about derivatives, so you are going to have stock options there, and it is going to be based on options and futures altogether. So conversion of shares into stocks, has it been mentioned in your your articles of association. Then meetings and proceedings. Every company will go through an annual general meeting, an EGM, or if it's going to be a normal meeting suddenly called for, whatever is that, the AGMs, EGMs and all the minutes of the meetings and their proceedings have to be covered in the articles of association. That is very, very important. Followed by the voting rights, proxies and calls. Why? Because when you are going to find out in terms of voting a member, the board of directors have to be re-elected, the chairman has to be elected, and all those procedures has to be covered through the articles of association. So you will be seeing that whether the proxies, the polls, the members, whatever the voting rights has to be covered under that. Followed by the appointment, the remuneration, the directors' value factors, everything will start coming into the articles of association. Why this is important is that last time, if you remember, I would like to share an example here. In the case of Infosys, when the MD and CEO, the former MD and CEO of Infosys, Vishal Sikka, the amount of money that was paid to him was one of the highest ever paid to any CEO in this world. He was almost charging quite worth about to 44 crores plus. Almost 48 crores was his income altogether in terms of the money, in terms of options and every other factor that was being given. Now that raised several questions from the board and the members saying that why was the CEO paid so high? Where is the governance issue coming into picture? Similarly, the CFO of the company was also paid very high in terms of the operation, in terms of the company factor. So automatically the board members and the factors started asking this question, why is the compensation going up so high? So why is this factor coming in? Is because again it will be referred to the articles of association, whether the company is following the norms, whether the company is following all the things that have been mentioned in the articles of association. Of course, you can go ahead and define and defy the factors saying that it's a will and wish of the company to pay a CEO so much, but still it is mandatory, it is important to understand that how much has been paid and at what rate it has been paid altogether. Now, the borrowing powers of the company, how much company can borrow, from where it has borrowed and how it has going to borrow in terms of the capital, rate of interest, the procedures, all those, dividends and reserves. So how much money has been kept as a reserve, how much money is being going to be given out as dividend per share, all those factors will come here. The accounts and audits, which are the eyes and ears of the company, the accounts and audit has also to be mentioned very, very clearly there, because if you are not going to mention it, if you are not going to take it forward altogether, then that will also be taken as a part here. So accounts and audit is very, very important. The procedure of winding up. So anytime if the company is going to get winded up or whatever the procedures that you need to follow has also to be mentioned here. The seal of the company also needs to be understood and kept, because the seal of the company is very, very important in terms of understanding. So the seal of the company also needs to be looked forward. Followed by, we are also going to talk about companies which must have articles. That means unlimited companies will have this, that is in terms of the total number of members, the share capital that has to be understood. Companies limited by guarantee, articles of such company must state the total number of members. Now in case of unlimited, even though they might be unlimited companies altogether, as we have studied in the types of company, keeping that in mind also, they must tell us clearly what is the total number of members and the share capitals which they have. Followed by, if you are a company limited by guarantee, that means you need to tell the total number of members that are there and what is the levels at which they have been working. Followed by companies which must have articles. When we talk about the private companies that are limited by share, very, very quite normal form. Now must include, according to section 3, the numbers of articles of the company. Public limited having the share company, that is the share capital, may be registered without the article. So that is where we are coming into picture in terms of understanding if it is a private company or a public trading. Of course, for them also the articles will become important important, and they have to register following the norms of the company law. And now we are going to talk about the doctrine of ultra vires. Now, what is this doctrine of ultra vires? Is sometimes when the company is not going to follow the rules and regulation, or if there are something that has gone against the system of the company, the doctrine of ultra vires will be called in, which means to say that ultra vires to the articles of association, ultra vires to the memorandum of association. When the company members and the factors have defaulted, have done something against the system. Now, that might be a financial fraud, that might be a thing which they have done against the system, or that might be in the operation factor, that might be about a query that is unresolved, or something that has gone against the entire procedure, entire operation altogether. Automatically, the doctrine of ultra vires will be called in, which means an inspection into the articles of association, an inspection into the articles of memorandum of association will start coming into picture. Now, the inspection committee will come forward and will look into the factor of what things have gone wrong, how the things have gone wrong, whether it has been intentionally done or non-intentionally done, what are the challenges at which the company is looking at, whether we will be able to proceed or whether it will lead to the winding up of the company altogether. So the procedure in terms of doctrine of ultra vires is a very, very important component, and if deviations are being found, deviations are being questioned, then yes, this will become a serious challenge altogether. Followed by, we are going to talk about the alteration of articles. What does this alteration of articles say is that whether suppose the company is going to follow certain procedures, or it's going to be altered by the company by passing certain special resolution altogether or at the general body meeting. Why? Because if there are going to be some changes, like for example, in the case of Ultratech Cement, in the case of HDFC Bank, in the case of Titan, in the case of other companies, when there has been certain amount of changes that have been brought in terms of the working procedure, the working order, the operations, the methodology in which it is being done, they will call in for a general body meeting. Especially, I would like to share an example here about L&T company. When L&T was trying to go forward in terms of building up a healthcare hospital, hospital in Mumbai, especially for cancer patients and other things, the shareholders had gone ahead and questioned the former CEO and chairman of L&T, Mr. A.M. Nayak, about why was the deviation of funds happening? Why is L&T company suddenly moving away from a construction-based company into a healthcare division altogether? So similarly, there might be questions that might be raised by the shareholders if they are trying to find that the company is deviating from the normal course of track of operation. So what is going to happen here is that alteration can be brought in moment the company says that yes, they want to make some changes, they want to bring in some changes in terms of the articles of association. With this, I come to the conclusion of this session. I hope and believe that this information provided in this session is of a high value and of a great resource to you. In the coming session, we will be talking about the factors called as prospectus, which is very, very important in terms of the company when it starts going in to invite new capital altogether. This factor of articles and memorandum is a very, very important concept from the exam standpoint of view as well as from the conceptual standpoint. So it is highly important and advisable to you that you understand the concepts and you go through it again and again. In the upcoming session with the prospectus, we will also try to understand the various other factors that has been decided by the company law for the betterment and development of the company. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me on this wonderful session.